Hi there. How are you doing, ladies and gentlemen? The year is swiftly marching on. And if you are a South African, you've just survived one heck of a week and a half. And I'm sure that as you contemplate the things happening in our ecosystem, you can start to realize just how important it is for us to be investing in our own inner well being and our mental well being and our relationship with ourselves. Because in the end, this relationship with ourselves is where all our resilience and all our resourcefulness comes from. And if you are feeling fatigued by the events of the past few weeks, if you are feeling completely stressed out for it, if out by it, if you are feeling completely overwhelmed by it, then the most important thing that you need in your life right now is to come back to a place of resilience, to come back to a place of resourcefulness. And so much of that resilience and so much of that resourcefulness resides in the relationship that you have with yourself. I know I speak for myself that there were a few moments over the past few weeks where I caught myself thinking, this is too much, enough now. Can we just take a chill pull? Um, and that's when I started to realize that it is so important to lean back into reservoirs of um, self love. I used to have this boss, Richard, he's a good friend of mine now, and he used to say that, when the only tool you have is a hammer, you're constantly looking for nails to bang or to bash. And sometimes I think to myself that maybe my obsession with self love is exactly that. I look at it as the response to just about everything. But you know what? I really feel as though it is one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves. It is one of the most important investments so that we can become bigger, stronger, more viable versions of ourselves. So we have the energy, the fortitude, the throughput, and the energy for that throughput to do what we need to do in the world, in our families, in our communities, and so that we can start moving past our limitations. And so I really believe that self love is a big, big part of the journey that we must go on as a collective so that we can be healthy enough to step into healthy relationships with other people. In the absence of that health, I don't see how we can possibly create healthy relationships in the world out there. So that's me. I'm off my soapbox now. And in this session, I am going to be exploring acceptance and self acceptance as a part, material aspect of self love. If we've not met before, if this is the first time you encounter me, then I'm so very happy to meet you. And I wish to welcome you to the Self Love Revolution. And I hope that you will participate in this exploration because, as much as I'm exploring this, I want to say to you that I am not a hardcore expert on this thing called self love. This is a labor of love for me. This is a self discovery journey for me, and I am looking for as many guideposts as I can, many leading lights as I can, and this is a conversation that I'm just loving having. I'm a coach and I help professionals to create careers in which they can flourish, and that, to have careers in which success doesn't mean that the other parts of them, the professional success doesn't mean that the other parts of them are tanked and that they don't reach burnout and that kind of thing. So, when I think about self love, I think about self love in terms of a very specific set of actions that we bring into this relationship that we are with ourselves. I've already explored the fact that a relationship means that we are in an actual relationship, that if we give ourselves time, we give ourselves attention, that we enter into dialogue with ourselves, and that we create something with ourselves that means that we are actively, consciously recreating our relationship with concepts, with ideas. We are reframing the way in which we are engaging with things, and we are discovering ways to be more and more true to the things that energizes us and inspires us and gives us the ability to rise above the challenges that life inevitably does send our way. We also spoke about this concept of willingness as a critical aspect of building this relationship of self-love. And I do want to say that whenever I speak about this relationship of self-love, what I'm really talking about is being in a resilient, wholehearted relationship, not only with ourselves, but also with the world out there. So I use these two terms, resilience and self-love, interchangeably. And I'm just putting that out there so everyone can follow me in case my language goes all over the show. Now, I wholeheartedly believe that willingness is the stepping stone, the launch pad from which all growth happens. When we are going into an unknown space, or a space that we might think is tricky and potentially going to take us into a dark place or make us feel uncomfortable, we have the choice to either resist going there and resist exploring that growth, or we have the opportunity to say, so that in spite of this discomfort, I know I don't necessarily want that discomfort, but in spite of that discomfort, I'm willing to explore it. I'm willing to go beyond the curtains that I have in my mind right now, and I'm willing to go beyond and try and figure things out. I don't know where I'm going to land, but I'm willing. I think that that is a skill. I think that is critical to having a growth mindset, and not knowing what the outcome is makes you an adventurer. Embarking on a journey, not knowing what the outcome is, makes you a creative human being. And it gives you a sense of personal courage and accomplishment. And I think willingness is just such a critical part. So the question is always, in any situation, and it's not a one and done kind of question. The question is, are you willing to expand and explore beyond where you're at? And are you willing to sit with the discomfort that that exploration might involve? Another element of self love that we spoke about last week was self compassion, and that self compassion is this process of offering ourselves kindness and recognizing the fact that there's nothing wrong with us. Very often, as human beings, when we feel that there's something wrong with us, that sense of enough overwhelms us, we alienate ourselves, and we not only alienate ourselves from other people, we alienate ourselves from ourselves. And can anything be more lonely and devastating than being alien to your own self, to not belong to yourself? And I think when we offer and extend self compassion, we make it possible for ourselves to be A, the recipients of kindness, and B, we make ourselves part of something bigger, this human race, this common humanity that we are part of, where every single person in this community, this common humanity, is a fallible human being. There are no perfect human beings. A fallible human being that has faltered on the journey to here. And I think that that is just such a critical part of cultivating a self love relationship. Because what it does when we're able to be compassionate with ourselves is that we make it safe for ourselves to do the next thing, which is what we're talking about today. And that is to accept ourselves wholly and completely. So, the question that we are deliberating today is self acceptance as a critical part of self love. And we are deliberating, perhaps it's necessary to do that, what it means to be self accepting. Now, I don't know that there is a universal definition of self acceptance. I don't know that there is even a definition of self acceptance that transcends each and every single scenario in a person's life. Self acceptance might have to look slightly different in different contexts and for different people. Now, what does it mean to be accepting? For me, and this is just my perspective, for me, to be accepting means to release judgment. And in the context of self love, for me, releasing judgment and being accepting implies a number of things. And the most important of these things for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, is that when we are accepting, we can be with ourselves or be with a situation truthfully and honestly. And as a result of that, we can really be robust with it and we can really have a deep engagement with it without it affecting our sense of self-worth, without it accepting our validity, without it affecting our validity, and without it taking away from our humanity. So that's a lot. That really and truly is a lot. I think we confuse acceptance with sanctifying something and making it okay and making it right. Acceptance doesn't mean that you're making right. Acceptance doesn't mean that you are sanctifying it. What acceptance actually means is that you're transcending judgment. It means that you're operating from a place that isn't limited by the constructs of right and wrong. It isn't limited by all the various constructs of judgment, of comparison, of appropriate, inappropriate, acceptable, not acceptable, enough, not enough, worthy, unworthy. I think it is so important for us to recognize that when we step into acceptance, we are really taking a bird's eye view, almost a, dare I say, a view of the divine, where we are looking at ourselves with nothing that is going to take away from us. The lens with which we look at ourselves is just to see ourselves as we are, to remove judgment, to remove anything that is subtracting and contracting, and to only hold a view of we are as we are in this moment, and that is enough, that is sufficient. Very often, that can be very hard for us to do. It can be very challenging for us to do because if we've experienced trauma, if we've been hurt in any way, if we've been isolated and neglected in any way, if we've endured incredible struggles that is destructive of our inner sense of self, then holding space for ourselves like that can be incredibly challenging, because to hold space for ourselves like that, where there is no judgment, where there is no right, where there is no wrong, means that we can be really and truly vulnerable with ourselves. There's no instinct to come in and to swoop in and to protect. There is no recognition, there's no play of victimhood in that kind of relationship with ourselves. There is just a state of I am with myself as I am with myself, and I am with myself as a complete and whole human being. There's no, there's no, there's no need to hide any parts. And as human beings, we've become very adept at hiding so many parts of ourselves. I think one of the challenges is, of course, that to a large part, so much of our identity, so much of who we are, so much of how we show up to the world and to ourselves is shaped by things that had happened long before we had a conscious idea of identity, conscious notion of who we are, conscious notion of who we want to be, and conscious notion of how we want to be perceived by others. We are almost automatically finding ourselves on a conveyor belt where we place ourselves into a situation where we change who we are and change how we show up so that we can fit into the communities and the environments that we find ourselves in. And somehow, somewhere through that process, and through the process of how our sense of right and wrong is cultivated, we find ourselves shaming parts of ourselves. We experience guilt, we experience embarrassment, there are sides and aspects and parts of us that we just feel won't be accepted by others. And somehow the non-acceptance by others becomes part of the way in which we judge ourselves. And so we keep those parts at bay. And over time, what we end up doing is we end up orphaning parts of ourselves. We end up orphaning, not just orphaning, but exiling parts of ourselves. And very often, these very parts of ourselves that we exile, these very parts of ourselves that we orphan, these very parts of ourselves that we are so afraid of showing and representing to the rest of the world for fear that we may be rejected, are the parts that need our attention, that need us more than anything else. Because when these parts continue to travel with us in the shadow, in the darkness, neglected, they agitate in a way that wants our attention. They agitate in a way that is very often disruptive in our lives and destructive of the very things that we try and create in our lives. So I think of situations in my own life where there are things that it's not that I necessarily don't want people to know. It's not that I am so mortified by it, but being surfaced, but it is awkward. It is difficult parts of me. And I was in a conversation with some friends, some girlfriends a couple of weeks ago. And for the first time ever, I shared a part of me that, and not necessarily a part of me, but an experience that I have in relation specifically to my parenting and what happens and when I lose my shit completely. And it was so fascinating. The relief that descended into my body when I shared this, by comparison to the anxiety I had the moments before I started sharing it. And what was also so fascinating was how transformative it was of the atmosphere that I had amongst those friends, or the atmosphere that we had as friends. It turned out that we were all struggling with something very similar, and we were all struggling with the way in which we own up to that part of ourselves. And so, what I realized in that moment was that so much help is at hand, so many resources are at hand, but because I had been for months now holding back on this part, this aspect of me, I'd been laboring needlessly, and it had been traumatizing me in a way that it didn't need to, because I thought that, you know what, I'm a coach, I should be getting this right. And I forgot for a moment that I'm just a human and I haven't got a track record of parenting teenagers, and it's a new thing for me. And so that is what acceptance does for us. It opens things up for us. It takes things out of the shadow and it allows the light to shine on it, and it allows us to start the work of repair. I want to say very quite just related to this very incident that since I had shared it a few weeks ago, the very situation that I was talking about, the very behavior that I was talking about, I haven't had the impulse to do it again, even though the trigger is there. It's almost as if something had been resolved for me without me going to work at resolving it. And that's how fascinating it is. when we just allow these uncomfortable situations to get the airtime that they need. And that is what acceptance is. It allows us to give all the parts of us airtime. It allows us, it allows us to make welcome those exiled, orphaned parts of us. And I want to say that I'm not of the view, I don't have the expectation that I might not behave again in the future when triggered. I don't think that acceptance is a one and done, never to return to this kind of situation thing. I don't think that. I think that self acceptance is an enormous process that we embark on, and it's a process that we embark on with ourselves over and over and over, and we return to the conversations. But it's like an onion, and you peel the layers away, and you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you eventually get to a point where perhaps that onion is now so well explored and understood and delayered and deconstructed that not only are you able to come to ease and peace with yourself in that situation, in that context, with that triggered state, but you can start helping others to come to that ease and peace and that almost naturally self compassionate state towards self. So I think self acceptance is really the path to making life easier. I don't think that life is ever going to present itself in a way where everything is perfect, where things work wonderfully. But I think that self acceptance makes it possible for us to experience ourselves in those situations of challenge with greater ease. I just want to reflect back on this idea of self acceptance and letting go of judgment. You know, you and I, each and every single one of us, we have a set of rules for how the world must operate, of how we must operate, and for how we want the world to perceive us so that we can feel okay with ourselves. Here's the thing, we don't know where these rules always come from. We don't naturally elect these rules. We don't deliberately and intentionally go and create all these rules. They are programmed into us from a very young age. And some of these rules don't serve us. Some of the beliefs we walk around with just don't serve us. And what I am discovering more and more and more is that when I'm walking around with a set of rules, with a set of beliefs that doesn't serve me, I find myself in resistance to the world. I find myself in an almost chaotic relationship with myself and the situation that might be playing out around me. And so the situation itself might not be hard or as hard as I'm experiencing it. It is that I am making it hard because of the resistance, because of these rules, because of these beliefs. And what the journey of self acceptance does is it gives us the opportunity to question our shoulds, our musts, our have tos, our rights and our wrongs, these judgments with which we walk around. And very often we come to the conclusion that there's no real difference in the world at the end of the day. Very often we come to the conclusion that the rules that we are sitting with are just inheritances and that we can actually rewrite the rules so that they are rules that serve us better. Very often when I speak about self-acceptance, people have a bit of a fear that they might tip into being callous and they might tip into rewriting their rules. They might end up being these bizarre creatures that is unpalatable to the rest of the world. But I think that when we speak and we think like that, the orientation from which we are speaking in the first place is one in which we are not necessarily in a self-accepting relationship with ourselves. We're speaking from the perspective of people pleasing and what ifing and catastrophizing. I think in the end, for most of us, there's a way in which life is just workable and operable for most of us. And when we approach life from that workable, operable perspective, we see that there are just so many similarities. It's again that common humanity from self compassion that comes through. The person that makes us alien most is ourselves. And so when we shift our rules, when we shift our belief systems, we very often transfer the fear to people outside. But truth is, it's our own people pleasing drive that makes us question whether or not reorganizing our rule system and our belief system is viable or not. I want to say this to you. If you can approach yourself from a place of self love, if you can approach yourself from a place of unconditional respect and honoring yourself and knowing that notwithstanding any decision you make, fallible or perfect in that moment, that you are enough and that you are entitled to create the experience you're going to create for yourself, then you're going to be okay. You are never going to know all the answers. The best you can do is to approach your life creatively and to experiment. And through the process of creativity, you will eventually come to a place where you design and create this life, this relationship with yourself that makes you super resilient. Without self acceptance, that creativity is never going to have the space to flourish in your life. So, I've gone over quite a bit about self acceptance and its potential in our lives. I want to share one or two other things about it, and then I'm going to call it a day. So, I find myself, and the example that I shared about um, sharing a parenting thing with my kids where I lose my shit and I shared it with my friends. What that moment did for me, that moment of sharing did for me, it helped me to reappraise myself. It helped me to forgive myself. And I think one of the things that is very implicit in self acceptance is self forgiveness. And it gave me a better sense of a perspective. I could really look at the situation in a more truthful way because prior to that, I was really feeling victimized by my children and I was feeling out of control and out of power. And what this moment of self acceptance did for me was that it gave me new perspective. I could look at things differently. I could look at things with new lenses. And because I looked at it with new lenses, I could bring new resources to it. I also have managed almost unwittingly, without any real deliberate conscious effort, I've managed to be able to release the aggression that I felt. And now, in the same situation, I have more perspective, first of all, as I mentioned before, but I also have more conviction. And so instead of operating from a place of aggression, I am operating from a place of passion and conviction and also curiosity. And I think that whether you're talking about one context of your life or another, and in particular, the context of being a leader in a business, when you are able to engage with yourself from a place of self acceptance, where it is safe for yourself to be with yourself, where all parts of you are welcome, where you are whole, where you are not completely dependent on the opinions and the way in which other people interact with you, then your need to be aggressive subsides very significantly. And the reason why that happens is actually quite simple. Because when we are in a state of aggression, when we are not in acceptance, when we are in resistance, what we really and truly are doing is we are trying to control things. When we step into self love mode, when we are fully accepting of ourselves, when we are able to be compassionate for ourselves, we step into a place of personal power. And control and power are very, very different. Control means I need to dominate something, I need to know what's happening at all times, I need to be in charge, I need to somehow exert authority. When we are in a place of power, our need to exert authority is very, very diminished. And self acceptance is one of the big levers that brings us into power. The conversation around personal power is a different conversation altogether, but I am wholeheartedly of the view that when we practice self acceptance, our access to our personal power is ever greater and ever more almost automatic. Another thing that happens for me, um, and it's very related to this conversation around aggression, which is that need to be autocratic, bossy, in control, is what happens for me when self acceptance is more prevalent is that I can be more leader like because I'm not operating from a place of fear. And the thing about leading is that in order to lead, you have to come into a place of okayness, of acceptance with yourself. So that's one of the byproducts of self acceptance. It's this ability to lead because now you're operating from not a place of conviction and control, but a place of your personal power, your passion, and your conviction. And all of this manifests in the way in which you convey yourself to others. Um, the other thing there's two more things that I want to say about what the benefits are of self compassion and self acceptance is that when we're in a relationship of self acceptance, we are able to be in a relationship with ourselves where we can hold the space for ourselves, we can make it safe enough for ourselves without it taking away from ourselves. We have the ability to have really difficult conversations. We have permission to be awkward. We have permission to not know the answers. And as a result of that, we have permission to be vulnerable. My view is that when you have a high degree, or the higher a degree of self acceptance you have, the higher a degree you have to A, have awkward conversations with yourself, but also then with other people. And so much of what we need in life, in business, in our communities, is the ability to hold the space for really difficult conversations. And I believe that until we are okay with ourselves, we will always be triggered in difficult conversations. And when a business is going through a rough patch, when a team is going through a rough patch, when a country, when a society is going through a rough patch, what we need is really difficult conversations. And I think that resilience and self love is so critical to creating the capacity within ourselves to meet those difficult conversations where they are. So, one other thing that I want to share around self love, um, self acceptance, and self compassion is that very often we hold ourselves back. We think that if we don't hold ourselves back, that we will be perceived as being too much of whatever, too much dazzle. Um, I think sometimes, and this is just an occurrence for me, is that we've got a lot of language in the world out there around creating more self acceptance for the parts of us that we are ashamed about and feel guilty about and embarrassed about, and you know, the traumatized parts of ourselves, the shadowy parts of ourselves. We tend to have more narrative around that in the world out there. By the same token, the same forces at play that hold those parts of us at bay are the same forces that keep our light at bay, keep our talents and our gifts and just the biggest expressions of ourselves at bay. And again, it pivots around our need for acceptance from others rather than making it safe and accepting inside of ourselves. And I think I'm going to read a poem that encapsulates this. Um, I don't think that we're serving the world by keeping our light at bay. So, whenever that too much feeling comes up, please know that there's a part of you that you've made unwelcome. Please know that there's a part of you that needs expression in this world, and that your self acceptance is a critical part of making that part welcome to yourself first and then to the world. A big part of self compassion and self acceptance is the ability to be in gratitude for ourselves. I don't think that we are in gratitude for ourselves often enough. And we can find a lot of ease in being grateful for this and grateful for that and grateful for things external to us. But I would challenge you, I would challenge anyone to share with me when last they were grateful for something about themselves, for who they are, for how they are, for why they are. You know, I'd love to hear. I'm like, if you have it as your practice to be grateful for yourself, for parts of yourself, for your own resilience, for your own resourcefulness, for your own ability to love, for your own ability to show up to the world. I'd love to know that. I'd love to know that there are people out there who are making this part of their lives, the celebration of self. Kind of in conclusion, I am going to read the poem, but kind of in conclusion, um, I want to say that when we practice self compassion and self acceptance as a critical part of our resilience building and our self love cultivation, I think one of the things that we make possible is that we can look at things with such brilliant light on it that we can shift from the victimhood. Very often, we operate in life from a place of victimhood. When self compassion and when self acceptance is a part of the relationship we have with ourselves, when that is how we relate to ourselves, when that is how we relate, when that is encoded into how we relate to ourselves, then we are able to own things more. We step into our victimhood because owning things is too difficult. Owning things is too challenging and too uncomfortable and too unsafe. And the job of self acceptance and the job of self compassion is to make it safe to be with ourselves, to be within ourselves, and to make it safe for ourselves to be the creators of our own lives. I want to read in conclusion to this here on my desk. I want to read this poem. It's a poem by Marianne Williamson, and it is Our Greatest Fear. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are we not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us, it is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And for me, that is what self acceptance does. It allows us to unshackle ourselves from the things that hold us back, and it allows us to accelerate into the world a force and an energy that not only sets us free, but it sets everyone around us free to some degree. So, if there is an inner perfection inside of you, as there is inside of me, I want to conclude just by saying that self acceptance is a journey. It's not a one and done journey, it's a journey that we return to over and over and over. And it is something that will free us from the very thing that we judge ourselves with. So I am looking forward to hearing from you. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And I'm looking forward to expanding my own understanding of self love from this engagement. Bye for now, and all of the very best. And if you happen to be celebrating Eid and observing Eid today, I wish you a very, very happy, blessed Eid, and I hope that you are surrounded by love. Bye for now.